Well, hello, everyone. As we wind up the class here, our last reading is the United Nations Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And I was looking for what I thought would be an appropriate way to end the course. There could have been any number of readings that I could have chosen, but this one seemed particularly apt. Given the maybe subterranean themes of the course, sometimes subterranean, underground, sometimes explicit, I think that the notion of human rights has probably been a theme that we have either explicitly dealt with or has been there unspoken. Clearly, it was a key expression, a key term, human rights, in the Declaration of the Rights of Man and Citizen. I think I might have said in that video that I don't know, I personally don't know of an earlier instance of the use of the term than in that document, but it's obviously become a more and more important, explicitly more important concept in modern age. Well, it became so. I thought it would be a good thing to look at, and perhaps one of the most fruitful things would be to look at this document, which I think was written in the late 40s. Gosh, when was it actually adopted? 48. When the establishment of the United Nations after World War II. To look at this document, see the kind of things that it talks about, see the kind of rights that it claims we have, and compare them with earlier things. I mean, one of the things that we can say right away that is, it is much more extensive. Perhaps the Declaration of Rights of Man and Citizen was the one thing we looked at, which is neared this in its detail in terms of what rights were. The Declaration of Independence is very terse, right? Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Even the Bill of Rights is very limited in terms of what it lays out as being fundamental human rights. So looking at this and comparing it with those earlier documents might be quite a fruitful thing to do. I thought that some of the things quite interesting, right? The first article: all human beings are born free and equal in dignity and rights. Echoes earlier language. Obviously, all we hold these truths to be self-evident, and all men are born equal. They are endowed with, created with certain inalienable rights. Right? Obviously, this document is building on earlier things like the Declaration of Independence and other writings. Maybe a different sort of spirit, right? Spirit being in this article. They are endowed with reason and conscience and should act towards one another in the spirit of brotherhood, which is, an interesting, more philosophical, I don't know about more philosophical, but more explicit about how people should. It's not just that you have rights; you should treat other people in a certain way, in the spirit of brotherhood. Some of the things are quite similar, I think, to earlier things. Everyone has the right to life, liberty, and security of person. Article 4 is something very explicit. No one shall be held in slavery or servitude. Slavery and slave trade shall be prohibited in all their forms. I don't know. Did the Declaration of the Rights of Man say that? It might have. In fact, I think it did. In fact, this document is lots more similar to that than to the Declaration of Independence, which, of course, never explicitly rules out slavery for obvious reasons, perhaps. No one shall be subjected to torture. No one shall be subjected to arbitrary arrest, detention, or exile, which seems very close to some maybe Fourth Amendment of the Constitution. Let's see other things. This is interesting. Article 13, everyone has the right to freedom of movement and residence within the borders of each state, and everyone has the right to leave any country, including his own, and return to his country. Obviously, a more international view. This is not a document that is meant to apply to any specific nation or citizenry. It's a document that's meant to apply to everyone in the whole world, which is a different perspective. Obviously, a global perspective. Everyone has the right to seek and to enjoy in other countries asylum from persecution. this way that setting down a fundamental value that if someone's being persecuted in their own country, other countries have them the obligation to provide them with some sort of refuge. Very interesting. Everyone has the right to a nationality, which is quite an interesting claim. Uh, this Article 16 about the family, that we all have the right to marry and to form a family. Very interesting. Everyone has the right to own property. It's explicit, right? Not explicit in the American documents. Well, no, actually, yeah, right. Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. It never mentions property explicitly. Freedom of thought, conscience, and religion, very close to the First Amendment of the Constitution. Freedom of assembly, peaceful assembly, it's a First Amendment, right? Article 21, everyone has the right to take part in the government of his country, directly or through freely chosen representatives. That's extremely interesting. Right? This idea that everyone should have a chance to be part of politics, which is not true in most of the world, let's face it. Now, this is interesting, Article 23. Everyone has the right to work. That is extremely interesting and goes far beyond any of the American documents, at least. Again, it's closer in spirit, probably, to the Declaration of the Rights of Man. Everyone has the right to work, to free choice of employment, to just and favorable conditions of work, and to protection against unemployment. That is the period after World War II is very progressive in many ways. President Roosevelt talked about the freedom from fear. He was talking about the four freedoms, and one of them was the freedom from fear, freedom from want. That beyond the protection of violation of rights, that human beings deserved a basic, social security, right? In the sense of a basic guarantee they wouldn't starve or live in poverty. That is a right. Very contentious. A lot of people would say there's no such right. Equal pay for equal work, right? Which is a very progressive idea. Right to leisure. Oh, yeah, Article 25. Everyone has the right to a standard of living adequate for the health and well-being of himself and his family, including food, clothing, housing, and medical care, and necessary social services, and the right to security in the event of unemployment, sickness, disability, widowhood, old age, or other lack of livelihood in circumstances beyond his control. I mean, if everyone has a right to that, then in America, it's a huge rights violation, because we certainly, in America, do not have the right to housing and medical care, obviously. But this document is saying that we should. The right to education, which is more or less acknowledged in America, right? I mean, you have a right to primary school education, high school education. Maybe not of one of minimal standards, but you have a right to something. But then again, you also have the right to go $100,000 in debt to get through college, right? Which is maybe needs to be changed. Really, I mean, very extensive. And you know what? Something very beautiful. The ideals that are embodied in this Declaration of Human Rights. To say, Article 27, everyone has the right freely to participate in the cultural life of the community. This is really, some people would call it utopia. But, utopia is the idea that there's a perfect life and that we could never get to it. But this document is claiming that these things are possible. That it's not impractical. It's not impossible to build a world where everyone has these things available to them. So really, an incredible document, and one worth keeping in mind, because in our time, which is a very pessimistic time, I have to say, we should be reminded that not so long ago, people had very high hopes for humanity, very high aspirations for what human life could be on this planet. And if we're living through a time of pessimism in terms of our capacity to imagine such a world, then that's too bad. But maybe recovering this view of the world is just what we need right